and you know that.
I didn't bring it in. It got inside on its own. They always will. The dead and the living. Because we're in here. And the ones out there, they'll hunt us. They'll find us. They'll try to use us. They'll try to kill us. We'll survive. I'll show you how. I was thinking, how many of you do I have to kill to save your life?
The Walking Dead. Some shows are interesting to talk about because they just do everything right, some are fun to talk about because they just do everything wrong, and some starts good then begin declining, while others start weak and then just keep rising. Or you could just be Steven Universe, which is all of these things at the same time. But when it comes to The Walking Dead, I just find myself going on and on about it just because every decision this show makes is just so extremely fascinating. I mean, when you think about it, it kinda has to be. When the main selling factor of your show being that the characters always die, you kinda spare all your decisions on extremes. So I just wanted to take a while to see, after all these years, how does The Walking Dead actually holds up? So let's take a little journey with me to see all the extreme good and extreme bad and the ever so fascinating ugly of season 1 of The Walking Dead. Episode 1 starts with this quiet scene of the protagonist Rick Grimes scavenging for resources before stumbling upon a little girl picking up a teddy bear. Now I gotta admit something in here, as someone who had his first experience with The Walking Dead be through the Telltale games, before watching the actual show, seeing the protagonist stumble upon a little girl gave me some very different expectations on how this scene is gonna play out, which made it all the more surprising when the girl turned out to be a walker that then Rick had to shoot. Looking at it more critically, while yes, killing a child in your first ever scene is a pretty easy and cheap way to start your show, but on the other hand, it does set the tone perfectly for what you're about to see for the rest of the show, so your mileage may vary. Following that scene, we are immediately thrown into the opening, which is not much, but I always loved how the opening always consists of different locations that you're about to see during that opening's respective season, making it kinda fun to watch during the first and last episode of that season, so that's something I guess. After that, we properly get introduced to this series' main protagonist, Rick Grimes. Now when you have yourselves a show with a constantly changing cast like The Walking Dead, you really need your main character to do a good portion of the heavy lifting. And they really could not have done a better job in that than Rick Grimes. Because a constant problem with a lot of It's the Apocalypse kind of show is that it takes forever for the main character to become competent at what they are doing. But by having the main character of your show be a police officer, which by default making him not a stranger to smoking other human beings, you're allowed to skip most of the readjusting process that comes with these kind of shows. And honestly, you can pretend that Andrew Lincoln's southern energy doesn't play a big part of the role. After waking up in the hospital, he finds himself terrified at the ruined, blood-filled state of the building, and seeing a corpse or two along the way really does not help matters at all. Continuing to explore, he finds a locked door with the iconic phrase "Don't open, dead inside" typed into it. Now, funny enough, even for how synonymous this sentence became with The Walking Dead, this scene actually did not exist in the comics. I know, right? This whole iconic scene was a show-only thing. In the comics, he does in fact find the dead inside, and the scene is him escaping them. In the grand scheme of things, this is a pretty inconsequential change, but it is the start of how the show will greatly diverge from the comics later on. Getting outside of the hospital, completely shitting his pants at the sight of destruction or corpses everywhere. Here is when he encounters his first walkers, by the way. At last making his escape and quickly running to his house to check on his wife and son, he gets a complete mental breakdown when finding the house empty. But his sad scene gets quickly interrupted when here is where we get introduced to Morgan and his son Twain. They attack Rick thinking he is a walker, but upon realizing their mistake, they patch him up and then they start to team up. And here is where we get to listen on Morgan's backstory and how, while him and his son are still alive, his wife was turned a while back. And worst of all, she is still right outside of their house trying to kill them, almost driving the two of them insane. I say almost, but see kids, that's what we call foreshadowing. After seeing the pictures of his family gone, he quickly realized that his family must have took them, giving him just a slightest bit of hope of finding them. Then Rick decided to get the bright idea of checking his police station for resources and firearms. And luckily they found that the hot water still works, so they take a well-deserved calming shower. A small scene like this really helps to drive the point home of how empty this world really is, for the sight of such a small thing could bring a smile to someone's face. Also here we get introduced to one of this show, and I do not use this word slightly, rather ingenious ideas. After Rick spots one of his former colleagues walking as a walker, he decides to put him out of his misery. But while using a gun might be easier, the sounds of the gun will draw out every other walker nearby. So 9 times out of 10, using a melee weapon will always be the right choice. Learning that most people would be hiding out to Atlanta for safety, he figures that if his wife and son are still alive, there is where he'll be able to find them. He parts ways with Morgan and his son, but keeping in touch with them through a walkie-talkie. Taking a car there, he quickly runs out of gas near a farm, making him go ask for gas from his fellow neighbor, just to discover that some people would rather die than try and survive in this world. So Rex helps himself to one of their horses. Heading into Atlanta just till you remember that cities mean bigger population. Bigger population means even more walkers. Quickly, the unreasonable number of walkers overwhelms Rex and his horse, eating the horse and forcing him to lose his weapon stash, driving him into a tank. But just when all hope seems to be lost, he hears this angelic voice. Episode 2 actually starts away from where Rick is at the moment to confirm that his wife and son, those being Lori and Carl, are in fact still alive, saved by Rick's best friend Shane. Here we also learn how Rick ended up in the hospital to begin with. So apparently right before the whole zombie thing happened, Rick got shot in the line of duty, forcing his best friend Shane to quickly escort him to the hospital and unlock the door while he's out. Here we see that Shane and Lori are moving on. Getting back to Rick still being trapped inside the tank, the mysterious man gives him a genius idea, which being run. Crazy, I know. Following his lead, they meet and we get introduced to the show's greatest man, giggiest of chads, goodest of boys, and the GOAT, Glenn. After saving Rick's life, Glenn leads him to where his other friends are hiding, where we get to the new cast, starting with Andrea, which I gotta say, for anyone who read the comics, you very well know that for some reason, while Cobble's version of Andrea is basically Rick's right-hand woman, but the show's version is... well, for starters, the first thing we ever see her do is putting a gun on Rick because they decided to save him, which is, Other than her, there's also Steve #1. I know that's not his name, but I'm going somewhere with this. There's also Stevette #2 and T-Dog. Yes, that is in fact what they call him. And while yes, for those of you who caught up on the whole Steve thing, you could argue that T-Dog's a Steve, but god damn it, I don't care, my boy is not as scrawny as Steve. And finally we have Merle, which is being the crew's resident asshole. Also, there's that other thing about him that I will refrain from saying for the time being. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, you know, but those who don't, first of all, as we established, you are freaks and also shame on your cows, but also it makes us a while, so bear with me. Getting back to where the show is at, apparently Rick's actions have caused all the walkers around the area to surround Glenn's group, which is why they were there to save him to begin with. And now they have to think fast before the walkers break into the place. Also, if you have been paying attention, you realize that one of the walkers is using a rock, and if you remember, other smart walkers have appeared in episode 1, like the little girl that picked up a teddy bear and the one opening the door. That never comes up again because apparently that was just an idea that they never gave much thought to. Moving on. Some tension starts to arise within the group when Merle decides to act like a jackass, wasting bullets and calling T-Dog some not very flirty stuff and beating the crap out of him. And while everyone is standing around like a wuss, Rick comes and whacks him in the face and chains him up, asserting himself as a freaking natural leader.
Look here, Merle. Things are different now. There are no niggers anymore. No dumb as shit inbred white trash fools either.
See, he gets a pass because he was making a point, you see. Failing to find an escape through the streets, they try under the streets using the sewer drain under the building just for it to be another dead end. I do feel the need to mention that they needed someone to go down, and here we start the trend of Glenn being thrown under the bus just for no other reason than him being Glenn.
But I've never gone down it. Who'd want to, right? Oh.
And then you have your usual Glenn being the goat to end all goats, and Andrea being a bitch to end all. Well, you get the idea.
Sorry for the gun in your face. Not that it was entirely unjustified.
Man, even when she's apologizing, she has to find a way to be a dick about it. They start brainstorming and realize that the only way walkers can tell other walkers is by smell. So if they smell like them, maybe... I still gotta say, they use this exact same method multiple times in the Telltale games, and I don't know why, but seeing it here again after all this time just makes me smile for some reason. So they go through the motions, find the body, cut the body, and cover themselves with their insides. Walking disguised as walkers right in front of them is pretty intense. Especially I love this one walker who just wouldn't stop checking out Glenn, turning every 2 seconds just to make sure that he's real. But sadly, while their plan was solid, nature was not on their side, cause it just started raining out of nowhere, forcing Glenn and Rick to make a run for it. But luckily, they quickly get into a car and manage to make a distraction for the others to escape. But sadly, somehow T-Dog loses the key to Merle's chain, forcing the crew to leave him to his death, with his only chance of escaping being a saw near him. Despite, well, everything, it's actually really quite sad to see the crew just leaving him like this to die. But despite everything, they miraculously get into the car and make their grand escape. Heck, Glenn even gets a sweet car out of it. One last thing, it's really nothing, but as an editor myself, I really cannot let this go unnoticed. There's a small scene where they sync the car's noises with the music, which I found quite creative.
Hi, I'm Andrew Lincoln, aka Ricky Dicky Doodog Rhymes.
Episode 3 starts by showing us how Merle was doing right after being abandoned by the crew, showing him taking it easy for a bit just before reality comes crashing down on him. Realizing that this just might be the moment where he kicks the bucket, he freaks out and starts searching for a way out. And as usual, Michael Rooker's performance is just nothing but stellar, screaming and weeping while chanting his signature catchphrase.
What I beg you for? I ain't gonna stop begging now! I ain't gonna beg you now!
Back to where Shane, Laurie, and Carl are at the moment, Andrea's sister starts arguing that they should go help them, but Shane, reasonably so, disagres with that. But here is where we get a first-hand look on one of Shane's worst qualities, cause, just like Andrea, even when he's making a good point like right here, he always comes out like an asshole saying it, giving him much less credibility. As for Rick and the gang, we see that at least Glenn's still having some fun with newcomer. Oh, come on! And finally, after all this time, Rick and the gang make it back to camp, and here where we get the heart-touching scene of Rick finally reuniting with his family. But something's not right, especially with Shane, for on the one hand, his best friend's still alive, but on the other, that means that he just lost the woman and kid that he got so attached to. So that's going somewhere, I guess. And also here's where we get introduced to even more characters. Dale, the car mechanic and the old wise voice of reason in the group, and he's Steve number 3. Also we see Steve number 1's family of Steves, Andrea's aforementioned sister, that's being Steve at number 4, Carol, her daughter Sophia, and her husband Ed, who's he's a nice guy. And finally, Daryl Dixon, brother of Meryl Dixon, the main muscle of the group and the user of the most overpowered weapon in this show, his iconic crossbow. Fast as a gun, quiet as a knife, and efficient as heck. Now remember back in episode 2 when I refrained from giving Meryl a proper introduction? Well, that's because Meryl and Daryl are the two special main characters in this show, mainly because they are show original characters that did not exist in the comics. And anyone who watched the show will tell you that Daryl is the most fan favorite of all the Walking Dead characters, making his mere existence alone the biggest reason to pick this show over its comic counterpart. And now we have the Triforce complete in what I like to call the Untouchables. For you see, The Walking Dead, just like its brothers, those are being The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones, is a show that prides itself on not having any plot armor whatsoever, and that anyone could die at any moment. But of course, because The Walking Dead is an anthology, they can't just keep wiping the cast every single episode. And that's where the Untouchable come in. Not necessarily a group that don't do death, Lord knows how many Steves overstay their welcome, look at you Maggie, but the group of characters that carry the show on their shoulders, the core heart and soul of this show if you will. And at this point of the show, they are Rick, Glenn, and Daryl, the legends to end all legends, and the main reason to make you watch the show. Getting back, the crew now had to think of a way of breaking the news of Meryl to his brother Daryl. And
Chokeholding's illegal.
you know, when all is said and done, it could have gone worse. Also, I feel the need to mention this, with Rick defaulting to be the natural leader of the group, it's really nice to see Shane rise up as his right-hand man, at least for the time being. After all was settled, Rick decided to go back for Meryl and the gun stash that he dropped back in Atlanta, especially after realizing that it had the walkie-talkie that kept him in touch with Morgan, taking Daryl, T-Dog, and of course,
Come on.
Aw, poor Glenn. Back at the camp, Lori was understandably furious at Shane because the whole my husband is alive thing, driving him away and cutting all ties with him. This marks the start of a series of unfortunate events that would slowly drive Shane over the edge. But luckily, our good buddy Ed was there to give Shane a distraction by being back to his usual being a nice guy routine. And that quickly leads him to Shane venting some frustration. Now I know that we're supposed to see this as a Shane going insane moment, but he can't really help but find it so cathartic on account of who he's beating.
Yes, 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 yes.
Heading over to check on Rick and the gang, alas they found Merle gone, with the only remains being an empty handcuffs and a severed hand, leaving the crew to wonder if Merle was still alive, and comfortably leading into episode 4. Episode 4 starts with this very slow scene with Andrea and her sister, that being Steve number 4, doing some fishing. Now while this scene isn't all that bad on its own, it's happening between first of all Andrea, which is ugh, and cause the other character is a Steve, it's the same as if she was there all by her own, so skip! After taking Merle's severed hand, Daryl uses his great tracking skills to, well, track him, finding that he crawled his way out of the roof, took a walker or two on his way, and showing us how he closed his open arm wound, which is yikes. Back at the camp, Steve number 3 decided to start digging holes in the ground out of nowhere, which is... I'm pretty sure it's nothing. And back to Rick and the gang, they decide to focus on the stash of guns for the time being. Also here is where we see some of Daryl's best qualities shine through, cause despite his aggressive demeanor and tendency to push people away, he is not an unreasonable person. He always puts the group first, and usually for the most part his impulsive actions comes from a desire to protect or avenge his friends, not selfish intent. And that's one of the reasons he is disloved within the fan base. Heck, looks like he's getting his own spin-off show later on, so that's neat. Back at the camp, Steve number 4 is still digging. Also after addressing Shane's holds
Yes, yes, yes.
thing, we get some more information about Steve number 4's backstory and how losing his family to the walkers almost drive him insane.
The only reason I got away was because the dead were too busy eating my family.
After Glenn does his usual amazing planning to get the stash of guns, they get right into action. The man is even doubling back for the hat. How can you not like this guy? Is it clear here that Glenn's my favorite character? Because he's my favorite character. Also, apparently, Glenn's so good at sneaking and traveling because he used to be a pizza delivery man, which is just funny to me for some reason.
You got some balls for a Chinaman.
I'm Korean.
Whatever.
But sadly, the plan goes wrong when the crew encounters another group of survivors who were looking for the same bag, causing them to kidnap Glenn while leaving one of their own behind. Glenn, no! Back at camp, we see that apparently Steve number 4 was digging because of a dream he had, which is, okay. Hey, you wanna take a look at the best good guy, bad guy routine you'll ever see?
You wanna see what happened to the last guy that pissed me off?
After Rick's gang and the new crew, now known as the Vatos, meet to discuss this whole double hostage situation, negotiations quickly turn into a Mexican standoff, and no, the irony of the situation is not yet lost on me. Rick wanted to do a peaceful hostage for hostage exchange, but Vato thinks that they should also give them the guns as well, leading tensions rising before Rick points out that T-Dog was set on sniper duty to keep things from escalating out of control. I especially love how much he's praying for Vato not to force him to pull the trigger.
Come on, man. Make the trade. Please.
Both crews are about to kill each other till...
Felipe!
And with a very pleasant expectation subverted, the Vatos turned out to be not just a hostile gang, but a group of people who stayed behind in Atlanta to protect the old and the weak.
You're the dumbest son of a bitch I ever met. We walked in there ready to kill every last one of you.
So with that, Rick agrees to give the Vatos some of the guns so they can protect their people better. Now, pausing for a minute to discuss this whole thing, as some of you might know, this whole plot was not in fact in the comics. The Merle stuff are obvious, but the whole gun stash and the Vatos are also filler. But unlike their Merle edition, I really think that they missed the mark on this one. I'm not saying that I don't like what's happening here, far from it, but what I don't like that this got to be our crew's first encounter with another group of survivors, because in the comics we don't meet another enemy human group till about season 3, and by that point enough time have passed that seeing new humans feel alien and weird, / most of them turned out to be dangerous, making the crew cautious about meeting other humans, which leans well into season 3's whole human settlement plot. But here with the Vatos, not only is it too soon for us to be interacting with another human group, but also they turned out to be just good people, robbing the story from the context that it could have had later on. But I digress. Intending to take their truck back to camp, they get there to the realization that it's no longer there, with their best guess being Meryl's doing. Feeling that he's out for revenge, the gang decided to run back to camp on foot. Back at camp, everyone was having a nice time, eating fish, doing some bonding, especially Dale and Andrea that started to develop a father-daughter-like relationship. But all good things must come to an end when a group of walkers stumble across camp and start picking off side characters one by one. Mostly some nameless NPCs, but also Ed and Steve number 4, that being Andrea's sister. And this event marks the beginning of what I like to call the Steve cleansing ritual. Okay, let's just rip this band-aid right off, it's been enough time. As I have mentioned before, The Walking Dead is a show that revels in killing off its characters, but there's an obvious problem that comes with this concept. Well, here's the thing. A character death is only effective if and only if one of two conditions are met. Either that the audience really like the character, or the character is very close to a character that the audience like. And because The Walking Dead keep killing off characters every now and again, this causes a problem with the screen time. Let me explain. For the audience to like a character, they have to spend a good amount of time with them. But if the show keeps killing every character it has, then the audience will not have any time to connect with those characters, rendering those deaths ultimately shallow. So the show gets around that by, and you guessed it, the Steves. Characters that get no screen time whatsoever and just exist to be killed later on, like Steve number 1 through 4 that we just mentioned. And that's, well, not a very good solution, to be perfectly honest, because now character deaths happen so often that you get desensitized to it, and these characters that end up dying either die very soon to when they were introduced, or just get no screen time so the viewers barely know their name. And with this formula, you can exactly guess who's gonna end up dead just by how much screen time they're getting. And while I believe this problem doesn't become relevant till about season 3, it's still something that you keep in your mind while watching the show. Getting back to the plot, on the bright side, now they have something to put back in the holes.
I remember my dream now. Why I dug the holes.
Episode 5 is brief. Not much actually happens in this one. It starts with Rick trying to contact Morgan. Remember Morgan? I'm pretty sure we're gonna meet him again before season 5, and he's not gonna be completely insufferable by that point. See kids, that's what we call foreshadowing. Meanwhile at the camp, the crew is still mourning the dead Steve, especially Andrea, who's still grieving her dead sister. And yeah, even though Andrea might not be the most likable character in the show, it's really touching to see her losing her sister just like that, so I guess you can still feel bad about— oh, fuck off! Around camp, we see how everybody else is doing. We even get to see a rare moment of Glenn putting his foot down, so that's nice. But through all the commotion, it looked like Steve number 3 actually got bit during the attack, ensuring him turning into a walker, and putting the crew in an impossible decision of what to do with him.
I'm okay.
Hey Andrea, how you doing? Andrea? Oh, Andy? Bitch, what do you think was gonna happen? Shane and Rick started arguing on where they should be heading from here, and then we still continue to see signs of Shane's insanity slipping, with him even considering to shoot Rick to get him out of the way. Also starting in there realizing what's happening and putting an eye out for Shane. Now, for reasons that I don't think I'll be going into in season 1, I really have some big problems with how they handle Shane going forward, but that's a story for another day. But this will never not be funny to me.
Jesus.
After much consideration, the crew decided to head for the CVC that Morgan recommended, mainly for shelter, but also maybe finding a cure for Steve number 3. Speaking of Morgan, Rick's still trying to contact him. I sure hope this goes nowhere in the next 3 seasons. While everyone's preparing to head for the CVC, Steve number 1, seeing the fate for Steve number 4 and Steve number 3, knew that he'll be next on the chopping block, so he decided to exit the show on his own terms, leaving never to be seen again. Heck, he wasn't that far off considering that Steve number 3 kicks the bucket not long after, so good intuition I guess. But as we later on get to see, he would have died either ways, for we find out through some videos recorded by Jeffer, that being the last surviving scientist in the CVC, that there is no cure and no one is researching for one. The crew barely managed to get into the CVC, and while ignoring them at first, Rick managed to convince Jeffer that if he doesn't open the door, their blood will be on his hands. By that, the crew get into the CVC to figure out what will their next step be from there. Episode 6 starts by flashing back to when the apocalypse first started. Here we see Shane, after seeing the army shooting anyone who's suspected of being infected, he does his best to protect Rick before escaping himself. And it's moments like this one that show how strong the bond between Rick and Shane was that puts a bad taste in my mouth for the direction they take later on. But we get to that when we get to that. Following the crew right into the CBC, they discover its state with all but one of the scientists either died, escaped, or committed suicide. But nevertheless, the crew finally can take some time to eat, laugh, and take a hot, well-deserved shower. Cleverly enough, the show also uses this scene to show us the current mental state of the crew in the meantime, with most of them doing fine for the exception of Shane and Andrea, who's dealing with admittedly a lot right now. After that, we get some more scenes of Dale trying to help Andrea out with her "I just lost my entire family" thing, and while I haven't been talking all that much about him, Dale's actually kinda amazing. You always have this sweet but competent old man aura surrounding him, being always there for when the group needs an advice, comforting, or just someone to talk to. He's great, which is sadly more than I can say about Shane, who's while drunk tried to get back with Lori, heavily harassing her in the process before she shuts him down, leaving him to go even further down towards the deep end. The next day, Jenner goes about explaining how the whole Walker thing happens and the steps of it. It starts by shutting down the brain and then just turning it into a lifeless husk. There isn't actually something in here that we didn't already know, just ensuring that the walkers are dead and that there is no one left inside. But the explanation quickly is interrupted when Dale notices a clock that's ticking downward. After asking Jenner about it, he reveals that when the timer reaches 0, the entire building is going to explode, killing everyone in it. He even goes a step further by closing out the gate so no one can escape, with his reasoning being that going outside will just result in a short, hard life and a painful death, while this will be a quick and merciful out. Tensions start to rise as the crew panics with 30 minutes left on the clock, with parts of the crew fighting back, crying, or in case of Andrea and Steve number 2, acceptance. But through a heartfelt conversation, Rick manages to convince Jenner to open the door and let most of them escape, but not before telling Rick his iconic phrase,
I'm grateful. The day will come when you won't be.
"Oh, I sure quite hope that nothing happens later on that makes this flying sense shiver down my spine every time I hear it." Jenner lets most of them escape, but not before dropping a bombshell into Rick, one that will not be revealed to us till later down the line. Notice that I keep saying most of them, not all. Well, that's because not everyone decided to escape, with Andrea and Steve number 2 wanting to stay for a quick and painless death. You can forget about Steve number 2, but Dale was refusing to let Andrea just die like that, and after giving an amazing heartfelt speech, Dale decided to pull his best and most iconic scene, and telling Andrea that if she's staying here to die, then he will stay with her, forcing her to make a choice.
Dale, get the hell out. I don't want you here.
Too bad. You don't get to do that. To come into somebody's life, make them care, and then just check out.
And by that, Dale and Andrea escape with the rest of the group, now fresh all out of Steve's, to begin the search for the next place that they can call home. You know, returning to the series after all this time gave me a newfound appreciation for season 1. The cast was still relatively small, at least in comparison to the later seasons, so the characters didn't have to always be fighting for screen time. And this is the season where they set up most of the later plots of the show. Granted, some of them don't play out all that well, looking at you, Morgan. It still manages to tell a complete and a compelling story, but it's still obvious that the show's still finding its footing, with characters like Daryl still needing some time in the oven before reaching their full potential. All in all, season 1's best strength, in my opinion, that it doesn't have a lot of the flaws that later seasons have. It doesn't drag like season 2, it doesn't keep introducing characters that goes nowhere like season 4 and 5, and the cast is fairly contained so that everyone can be given a room to breathe. And I ran out of things to say, so subscribe. I'm not asking you, made it all this far, didn't you? So, you know, do it. You do it? Good? Good.